Hi, everybody. I'm FedScoop Editor-in-Chief Billy Mitchell, and I'd like to personally thank you so much for joining us this week for FedTalks and National AI Week. Our first session today on day 3 is a fireside chat with GSA Administrator Emily Murphy, in which we talk about GSA's evolving role as a federal landlord in a post-COVID-19 world and how GSA has provided leadership to other agencies on moving to telework. Please note that this interview was recorded during the first week of November, prior to the election results being determined. Therefore, it does not address GSA's role in working with the upcoming presidential transition or any of the news that has emerged in recent weeks. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy this final day of Fed Talks.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Billy Mitchell, editor of FedScoop, and it's my great pleasure to be joined by Emily Murphy, administrator of the General Services Administration. Emily, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Billy, thanks so much for having me here.
I'm really excited to chat with you today because I know there's been a lot of big changes underway at your agency, and a lot of them tied to this madness of the time we're going through in COVID-19. A lot of what I want to talk about today stems back to the fact that GSA really serves as the landlord of the federal government. You have many missions, but that's a big one. So let's start there. There's a lot of transition in how people are working in the federal government now, and there's not a lot of people in the office anymore. So I'd be curious, what is GSA doing to prepare for the future of federal real estate and the potential shift from physical office environments to a more remote work stance in a post-COVID-19 world?
It's a great question. It's one that we're spending a lot of time thinking about. Because to scope out the issue to begin with, we've got 370 million square feet of office space that GSA manages. And we're looking at agencies where in some cases they've got 60% of their workforce going in some cases they've got 5% going in. And it's a recognition that that there is no one size fits all answer. But it's giving us the chance as sort of the federal landlord to be, and honestly, as trailblazers in telework, to look at how we would want to design the workplace of the future. So we've been pulling together what we call Workplace 2030, and which doesn't mean we're going to wait 10 years to have results, but means instead we're trying to figure out how do we take steps over the next 10 years to build the workplace that we want, one that accommodates and provides the flexibilities for the federal employees, lets them work the way they want to work, and that meets their agency's mission, helps us recruit and retain those employees, but also better uses space. Because some of the lessons we've learned are that there's no one size fits all. Some agencies need more SCIF space, or they need operation centers. Others need to have laboratory space, and how we're going to approach that problem is very different. Some may need workstations, but others may need spaces where they can be meeting either one-on-one or in large groups with the public. So trying to figure out sort of a series of test cases for what that space looks like. And then trying to figure out also how the technology we put into those buildings, that they're not just a warm lit shell, that we're giving them a total solution. Everything from the furniture that goes into that space to using our EIS contract to make sure that we have the right telecom, thinking about, do we want arms on our chairs? Because when you think, people touch the arms on their chairs, and that's not an area that people think to clean a lot. Also, it means thinking about how do you create a culture, though, where someone who's teleworking more or even perhaps becomes a virtual employee doesn't feel like they are getting fewer opportunities than someone who's in the office. So it means also focusing on how we change our management, and we implement technologies that allow people who are working remotely to feel incorporated, that hybrid meeting experience. So the two of us talking right now, we might as well be in the same room. We can see each other. Yeah. But if two of us are in the same room and one person's a disembodied voice on a phone, they're missing out on a lot of that. So how do we find the answers and come up with that right balance? And so it's a project I'm excited about looking at, and I think that there's really a potential for a lot of savings, but also ultimately the potential for better workspace for federal employees.
I'm glad you mentioned the tech element of it because, telework is such a big part of what we're experiencing right now. And when you talk about GSA and telework, you guys have sort of long served as the gold standard in the federal government for telework. Before you came in, and even during your tenure as well. So I'd be interested to hear what the pandemic has taught you about the strategy and what you've been doing right, and what you might share with other agency leaders who might not be as far ahead and are now kind of realizing, hey, this is the future. We need to kind of pick up our feet, get moving.
So I guess one thing I've learned is that I'm very lucky. Uh, I worked for GSA from 2005 to 2007. There is no way that the GSA of 2005 to 2007 could be doing what the GSA of 2020 is doing. And I've got to give a lot of credit to the GSA leadership that came in between Casey Coleman when she was the CIO of GSA, David Shive, who has been the CIO for I think 6 or going on 7 years, that they invested in the systems so that we were able to be the first agency, our first major agency to go to mandatory telework across the board. We did a March 10th test, and we sent everyone home. We gave them a series of exercises, and we said, all right, we're going to really stress test our systems. It worked so well that on March 16th, we were able to send out a note saying that starting March 17th, everyone teleworks. I think what I've learned from that is that it's my job to keep building that foundation and keep investing in the newer, better technologies that we need so that GSA continues to be at the forefront of telework and at the forefront of technology innovation, because that's the way that we're going to attract and retain talent. I've actually had conversations with employees who said that they chose GSA because of our IT. And I want to make sure that we continue to be the agency that does that, but then also shares what we've learned with other agencies.
And one quick follow-up, but there's obviously the technology, but there's also the need for a willingness of a leader like yourself who's going to support that. And we've seen in other places across government that perhaps people might doubt that people are working during such an environment. So what about the sort of change management and the culture for acceptance and sort of that air cover that somebody at the top needs to provide to make something like that successful?
So back in August, we actually got our senior leadership team together, which means on a Zoom call, and we all had read a book called Remote, that was based in I think it's the 2013 book. And we used that as sort of the bouncing off point for what do we need to be doing to make sure that what we're doing now is successful and what we're doing in the future is successful. We're meeting it again at the end of November to talk about new strategies also. So how do we do a better job of managing remotely? How do we do a better job of preserving culture remotely? How do we do a better job of this hybrid technology meetings that I was talking about? So it's definitely it means we have to keep stretching, not just from a tech side, but we have to stretch from a management side also to make sure that we've got the information and the measures and that we're providing the leadership that's needed, but that we're also providing the opportunities. Because if someone who's working from home doesn't feel that they're getting the exposure or the chance to work on new projects, then they're also not going to be able to grow in their careers, and we're going to lose them. And that's going to be a loss to the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. Continuing on the element of tech, obviously outside of the telework stance, GSA has done a lot during this time of COVID-19 and helping other agencies, just to up their digital services in response to, providing services to citizens across the country during this critical time. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I know I've talked to some people such as David Shive and others throughout GSA about that, but I'd love to hear how GSA will continue to serve as sort of tech consultants through the TTS and AT&F, PIF programs, all those for the rest of the government moving forward. And then, AI is a big thing we're talking about this week. So I'd love to hear how that's playing a role as well.
There's so much to talk about. I feel like we could do an entire session just
Absolutely.
on that question. So I'd say the centers of excellence, we have just recently announced that we added a new agency partner. The JAKE, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center AI, Center of Excellence, has now been operating for a year and it's been incredibly successful. And I'm proud that the very first project we worked on was humanitarian response. The long term, we're looking at it, trying to make sure that the contract vehicles we're putting in place, we've done a lot to try and consolidate schedules, looking at next generation GWACs, trying to provide buying guides, but we're trying to incorporate all of those new cutting edge technologies into those contracts. So STARS 3, which is currently going through the evaluation process, the Polaris GWAC that we've been talking about, that's still in the RFI process. As we move forward with each of those, or even Alliant 2, which is out there already, those are all helping implement AI, machine learning, robotics process automation across the federal government. And TTS through its COEs, as well as other parts of GSA, are there providing that technical expertise, whether it's through the community of practice or through specific one-on-one engagements with agencies.
So let's close today. We're kind of closing in on time with a personal question. You're nearly 3 years into your tenure as GSA administrator. Obviously, you've spent some time at GSA prior to that, but now you're running the entire agency. I'd love to hear about your proudest moments as GSA administrator, and then kind of alternative to that, what have been your biggest challenges during that time?
It's always hard to answer this because there's so much of the credit goes to the leadership team and the people of GSA who've done a lot of hard work in the last 3 years. But when I came in, I said that we wanted to provide ethical leadership, reduce duplication, increase transparency, and improve competition. And those were my goals. I'd say my proudest achievement, though, is that we've kept GSA employees safe. Our COVID rate is very low compared to the population at large. And when you consider that a lot of GSA employees actually go into buildings to deal with cleaning or COVID incidents in those buildings, that really speaks to the fact that we've been prioritizing their safety and taking the right precautions. I'm proud of the schedules consolidation work that's happened. We have over 99% of the schedules consolidated in one contract. We have $20.3 billion in savings that we've delivered in 3 years. That our small business numbers are up substantially, and that our customer satisfaction and vendor satisfaction scores and our employee satisfaction scores are actually all at the highest levels in the history of the agency. So we've managed to find ways to deliver services and deliver value in a way that works for agency customers, our industry partners, and the GSA employees who have to implement those solutions. We've improved our supply chain security. That's going to remain a challenge. Our competition levels are up, and I have been so fortunate. I've had such a great team that COVID-19, the government shutdown in 2019. None of those things have daunted GSA at all. We've instead been able to grow from a contracting standpoint. When I took over GSA, we were doing about $55 billion a year in government contracts. It looks like in 2020 we did $75 billion in government contracts. Wow. So it speaks to the fact that listening to our customers and listening to our vendors has really paid off.
That's great to hear. GSA has always been a hotbed of innovation as long as I've covered it, and no different under you. So I look forward to following what you guys do, especially as you move forward in that plan for the future of the government space in 2030. It's really exciting stuff, but we'll leave it at that for today. But I just want to thank you so much again, Emily Murphy, for all your time and everything you do.
Billy, thanks so much for having me here.
Absolutely.